Hi there folks, Matt Gemmell here once again. I'll need to make this quite quick because I am heading out shortly to pick up my wife and my son from my son's swimming lesson, so forgive the brevity. You'll actually probably be very grateful for it. I want to talk to you today, briefly as I said, about therapy. Now, despite appearances, I suppose I'm not a therapist. I'm not trying to sell you therapy. I am very much in the client position there. The reason I'm talking about this is because I think that I don't like words like audience or following, but yourselves who are watching this, and mostly people, mostly men, I believe, and mostly from a sort of technical kind of background, and we are notoriously slow, at least, and often quite bad at taking proper care of ourselves in the broader sense. So this is sort of an effort at normalization and just trying to make you aware that there is a pretty powerful tool for helping yourself with the other side of health beyond that of the physical functioning of your body. I should say up front that if you've found this because you're in distress at the moment, whether you feel that you're in danger from yourself, from your thoughts, or whether you are, as I said, in distress, be it anxiety, depression, something relating to your circumstances, your past. But if you're in crisis at the moment, then the best approach is always to a medical point of contact. Your general practitioner can certainly help if you are in acute crisis. Of course, the emergency services are there for you. You can also speak to someone that you trust who can help you seek out that urgent help, be that a family member, a parent, your partner, siblings, close friends. If you're a young person in particular, where the world can seem rather difficult to navigate and you don't really know how to go about accessing services, then an appropriate trusted adult is the person to speak to, whether that's a parent, a teacher, a doctor if you can access that, police officer, and so on. There's plenty of help available. In particular, if you're concerned about your physical safety due to your own thoughts, there are a number of crisis lines, and you can readily find those for your area just by searching online. The Samaritans is one that's very well known here in the UK, but there are similar services and other Samaritan services as well, pretty much worldwide. So by all means, pause this video and go and seek out that help and speak to someone you trust and deal with that urgently first. But if you're not in an urgent situation and you're just sort of thinking about therapy and whether it could possibly be for you, then let's have a wee chat about that. I think there's this perception, and I was guilty of having this myself when I was a younger man, that therapy is for something you sort of seek in extremis, when you are in very dire, obvious present need. Something that someone gets sort of bundled off to via medical referral as a consequence of, immediately recent trauma, abuse, suicidal thinking, all of these kinds of things. Or to assist with sort of more perhaps dramatic and visible compulsions and phobias and disturbances of mind and so on. And whilst therapy certainly has its role in all of those things, it's a much more widely applicable tool. And I mean, I'm honestly of the belief that just about everyone in the world should at least have periodic contact with some form of therapy. I think we'd have a much happier and better functioning global society if that were the case. But until that time comes, it's something you have to initiate for yourself. There's this concept called the Trauma Olympics, sarcastically, which refers to this. It's this thing that we can often be quite guilty of thinking that our stuff, our problems, are not bad enough to qualify for going to therapy, or are not enough to justify how we feel about those problems. And that's, of course, a transparently corrosive and self-defeating, self-damaging thing. There is no entrance exam for therapy, nor should you ever consider any idea of a minimum threshold of need or category of issue that would be a minimum requirement for seeking therapy, especially because I found that we are usually not aware of the extent of the effect of a thing, and nor on the other end are we aware of the full breadth of the causes for a thing either. So it's been my experience that we virtually always underestimate the sort of breadth and surface area of any issue that we might be thinking about getting some help with. So that's something to keep in mind. That said, we all have a background, we all have a history, and we've all encountered a series of circumstances and events and relationships and so forth. And there, unfortunately, will always be trauma of whatever type. I don't want to say of whatever scale, because everyone has their own reaction to the same things. Otherwise identical circumstances, if that's possible, befalling one person could be shrugged off, and then befalling a different person could result in a sort of deep, lifelong trauma. And it's counterproductive and borderline irrational to assume that because some other person has handled something in a particular way, apparently, that you must then shrug off a similar scenario despite feeling that it's a problem. So we all have our histories and our circumstances, and some of them are not so good, and they have pervasive effects, pernicious, and they can have effects that we didn't and would not foresee. And the problem in particular, I think, with human beings is that we sort of get stuck in these ruts, or these tight little loops, in terms of how we think about our stuff, our baggage, our problems, our traumas. And it is the stasis of those patterns that becomes a problem. It becomes, grit in your eye, a stone in your shoe, whatever analogy you'd like to use. which damages our emotions and our relationships and our enjoyment of our lives and so forth. It is the sort of calcified, fossilized nature, the unexaminedness of our responses to our traumas that I think is the biggest problem. And it took me years to understand that. It took me a long time, probably longer than I would like to admit, but there it is. So everyone, I think, has cause, simply by being a living, breathing human being existing in our complex society, to seek therapy. And it should be something that we think of in the same way as going to the optician if you can't quite read the small text anymore, or the dentist if ice cream has started to hurt that tooth at the back, or whatever it is. It should be just that normal. And I have this theory that, particularly these days, where we're all just a bit more enlightened and just a bit more willing to consider the idea of mental health and so on, I have a theory that there are a great many people who, at least inwardly, probably know that they could benefit from therapy, or suspect that they would, and are not resistant to the idea of it in itself, but are intimidated by the nebulousness of how you get from, I could maybe benefit from therapy, to actually being there, having a session, And that's totally understandable, because it's a scary thing. How do you do it? And of course, you can do it via the medical route and see a doctor, or speak to your doctor. Here it would be, that's in the UK, it would be making a phone call to your GP and then probably speaking with the practice's SCPN, community psychiatric nurse. You get a phone call most likely, or go in person, but usually a phone call these days, have a wee chat, and you'll have several of those on a sort of follow-up basis over the course of weeks, and then maybe get a referral. And you can certainly do it that way, but for those of you who are adults in particular, you can absolutely self-refer and set it up yourself. And a lot of people don't know that, so there you go. So how do you do it? Well, there are, these days it tends to be, with everything being online, there are online directories of therapists. Now, what words like qualified and licensed mean vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there are bodies in the sense of organisations in most countries that ensure that people have certain levels of qualification and adhere to certain professional standards, etc. So there are, as I say, these online directories, and you can find therapists in your area if you're wanting to go in person, which you don't have to do, or approximately in your area if you want to do it via video calls over the internet, which is readily available and widespread and totally normal now as well. And typically you would just have a look through. Everyone's got their things they specialise in. These will be listed. The therapists, you'll learn about their background, and you can make a short list, and you can send an email to ones that you think might be a good fit for you. And if they have availability, then you will usually have a free, just a wee 10-minute phone call. Not straight away, instantly, of course. They'll get back to you, email you back, arrange the time. So you don't need to feel alarmed that it's all going to suddenly happen immediately as soon as you click a button. And you just have a wee chat, again, at no initial cost, invariably, about what's going on, what's caused you to seek therapy. And whether the therapist feels that they'd be a good fit for your needs, and if so, then you'll schedule an actual session. So it's literally that simple. It's a bunch of little simple achievable things that you can absolutely do. You can search online to find a list of therapists. You could do that. You can look through some profiles and maybe make a wee short list of tabs in your browser. You could do that. And have a think about it, build up some courage, and maybe just click and send a wee message to one or two. You could do that and then just wait to hear back, see how you feel, maybe arrange that introductory phone call. It's just a bunch of little discreet, simple steps that doesn't need to be a sort of thing that might be frightening to you, like walking into some fancy office. So it's more accessible than you might think to sort of get on board. So how does it work when you're actually doing it? This, of course, will depend a lot on you and a lot on your therapist, but there are certain things that are almost universal, like the pace. What typically happens is that you'll have a session per week, and the session will be an hour or just under an hour. And I remember having gone through a bunch of rounds of therapy, and indeed, as I should have said earlier on, being in therapy also at the moment myself. What will happen sometimes, particularly if you haven't done therapy before, you finally made this commitment and you've gotten over nervousness, anxiety, and whatever barriers you have, and it's suddenly starting. You might think, well, let's get it bloody done then. Let's do 2 hours in a row. Let's do 3 hours or something. Cost notwithstanding. And I have learned that there are really good reasons for the more typical pace, that 1 hour-ish, once per week pace. It really is a sweet spot of how you will respond to the process and how you can best be ready for the next session. So my recommendation to you would be to think of it going in as you're going to do about an hour, about once a week. And the recommendation seems to be that you give it sort of 5 or 6 sessions before you sort of assess, for yourself or in concert with your therapist, how it's going. Because you can absolutely switch therapists if you don't feel that their particular approach or set of skills or whatever is gelling with what you feel you need. And that's absolutely, completely normal. And the therapist knows this too. There's not going to be any hurt feelings or awkward breakup scenes or nothing like that. Quite the opposite. It's like medication, like antidepressants or something. You have to try a few before you find something that suits you. So whilst I'm quite certain you will get on fine with the vast majority of therapists, just know that you're not locked in if you feel it's not quite working out. Nor are you typically signed up for any huge length of time right from the start. It's not an Adobe software subscription or anything like that. So that's not something to be anxious about. So that's the pace. What about the cadence of therapy? I've found that it's not week after week after week of revelations, and you shouldn't expect it to be, because it's a process and it is work, and it can be difficult. It can be emotional in the moment, of course. Even at times you don't expect. And the therapist does totally expect that will be the case at times, by the way. But it can be extremely draining. There will be times when I will come out of a session and I'll need to change my shirt. It will have had that degree of a physiological response. I think of that as a positive thing. I think of that as committing and opening up and, really sort of shaking the box to see what falls out, sort of thing. And it can be arduous. So I've sort of developed this routine that I found works really well. When you come out of a therapy session, you are going to be drained and kind of stunned, probably. And if someone tells you a piece of information in the 5 or 10 minutes after you come out of a therapy session, you better write it down, because you're not going to remember it later on. It will be the time that you will forget stuff. So for that reason, what I do is, after a session, immediately after, in the next 5 minutes, I write down, I use my wee Supernaut notebook thing, but write it in your phone or paper or whatever you want. I write down just 2 or 3 bullet points of where we were at the end of the session, context, because you will forget. And then I just leave it alone for days, which is not really leaving it alone, of course. You are thinking about the stuff that you've spoken about, that you've uncovered, that you've been sifting or whatever. You are thinking about it at a certain level, sometimes consciously, sometimes in the form of dreams, nightmares, emotionality. There are many ways it manifests, but you are processing it, to use the term. And then I have sessions early in the week, the working week. So it's the weekend, the following weekend, by the time we're rolling around to it almost being the next session again. So when it gets to almost the next session, I like it to not just be the night before, because you feel like you're sort of rushing your homework kind of thing, but I like to then just jot down 2 to 4 bullet points of just anything to do with either thoughts that have come about as a consequence of the previous session, or stuff I'd like to just remember to mention or bring up or otherwise deal with in the next session. So it's kind of like a bookend. One session finishes, immediately jot down a couple of bullets of context, and then when it's almost time for the next session, again, a couple of bullets of whatever. And that I have discovered for me through trial and error over a long time is pretty effective in creating a feeling of it being a process that stretches throughout the week, rather than just this sort of staccato, isolated event within the week. So perhaps that would work for you. Which brings us to, what therapy does. What are the results? Therapy is kind of a medical thing, in the sense of, you're trying to feel better or to function better. And I think there's a big tendency to simplify medical things in terms of the desired outcome. In particular, to shoot for healing. It's either healed or failed, And to an extent, that's true. If you get something physically wrong with you, you either want it fixed, or you want its consequences, its impacts, its symptoms to be ameliorated, so that you can deal with it better. The broken bone knits together, or you get a filling in that tooth, or you get your appendix taken out, or your blood pressure comes back to normal, or whatever the hell it is. But the mind is a bit of a more complicated thing, and I think, and I have found, it's helpful to adjust your expectations in terms of a positive outcome. I have found it far, 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 far more common that the result of therapy is not healing so much per se in the completely done and dusted and fixed sense, but it's two things. Insight that you didn't have before. Insight and understanding of situations, of their impacts on you, their effects, what actually happened, what the motivations were, all of that stuff. So that kind of insight or understanding, and perhaps consequently, change in yourself. Change, not necessarily being fixed or healing, but simply a change in the tune, getting out of those tight little loops, getting out of the rut and onto a new path. Might not be the old path from before, whatever, but a change in the status quo, a breaking of the stasis. That was the word I used earlier, wasn't it? Those are eminently realistic and achievable goals for therapy. They are the most common outcomes of a therapeutic process that's working, in my opinion. And I guess most importantly, they are pathways to a sort of healing that you maybe wouldn't have preconceived when you enter the therapeutic process, but you come to understand, as I said at the start, that it is the stasis that is the barrier, and it is the understanding and the, as I said, hopefully consequent breaking apart and reassembling into a different form. Like those Lego kits my son has so many of, where there's the main thing you can build, but you get 2 sets of instructions for 2 other things as well, made out of the same bits. That is the most realistic and probably, honestly, the most effective therapeutic outcome as well, because it's a kind of fallacy to know that there's something wrong in your mind, your mental health, your feelings, and still in that state to preconceive of what the ideal outcome of therapy for it would be. If you think about it, it's a perfectly understandable sort of blindness or presumption or naivety. It's much better to be open to the directions that the process, which you yourself guide, will take you in. That's committing to therapy. And if you can accept that it is the shifting of perspective and the changing of the status quo that are your goals, then it's amazing how much better you can feel, even if you can't consider it a fixing of whatever the problem or the trauma was. I want you to have a wee think about that. I'm a huge proponent of therapy, and I feel no personal shame at participating in it. I do it for myself, I do it for my family, I do it because I have a need for it. It's perfectly respectable and decent and constructive, and I would even say responsible and progressive thing to do. And I would really hate it if you were someone who could benefit from it, and remember, I think that's almost everyone, but you didn't make use of every possible tool that you can use to help yourself feel better. So there you go. I really do need to grab my car keys and run down the stairs and get out and go and pick up my wife and my boy. But there you go. Therapy. Don't rule it out. And if you do seek it out, I hope and I believe that it'll work for you and help you to feel a bit happy, a bit more in control. Okay? I'll speak to you again soon. You take care.